talking about the Kite Runner. First up is the pomegranate tree. So what major themes was the author inferring with the recurring idea of the pomegranate tree?
I think one of the main things was friendship, because it's talked about early in the book how Hassan and Amir carved into the tree. I think that just automatically, that was just kind of the start of their special tree.
And I think going on that is the tree kind of changed as the friendship changed, because when their friendship was good and it was going well and it was right, the tree was bearing fruit and had ripe fruit for them to eat. And then once their friendship kind of drifted apart and was having trouble, then the tree stopped bearing fruit. And also, I think it shows even though that happened, the tree was still there, even though it wasn't bearing fruit. Just the bond and the friendship was still there, even though it wasn't flourishing and blossoming.
What else was represented by the infertility of this tree, as the novel progressed?
Well, his wife Soraya, I think their barren relationship between Hassan and Amir was mirrored through the relationship between Amir and his wife, because they couldn't have kids of their own, so then they had to take on Hassan's child. And it says on page 264 that the pomegranate tree hadn't formed fruit in years. And I think that kind of suggests that because their friendship went kind of dormant, that it wasn't gone, it was just it wasn't attended. They both kind of gave up and went different ways. And then Amir has to come back to it when he comes back to the end of the novel and refertilize it and start making it good again. And it's he starts that process of refertilization, but it's not all good again yet, because at the end of the novel we see that his Hassan's son he's smiling, but it's not all the way better yet, and that's how the tree kind of ties in there.
Right after that, on page 264, Amir is talking, and he said, "I found what I was looking for. The carving had dulled, almost faded altogether, but it was still there. Amir and Hassan, the sultans of Kabul. I traced the curve of each letter with my fingers, picked small bits of bark from the tiny crevices." So what does that say about, as he's returning to Afghanistan, what is he trying to do? If the tree represents their friendship and the tree is dying, what is he trying to do by, he's trying to find this carving, and he's trying to curve each letter out again so that it's predominantly in the tree again, so that you can see it again.
It's he's trying to rekindle the friendship. It's because he's been haunted by not standing up for him by the rape, so he's been trying to kind of revive it. And so when he's picking up the tree, it's that's just his way of trying to be no, this friendship isn't over. No.
So that's in a whole symbolizing his entire trip back to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to revive that relationship.
Pomegranates have a significant role in a lot of ancient cultures and religions. They have a really special role as a fertility symbol in weddings among people of the Middle East. So, again, as a fertility symbol, Soraya wasn't able to conceive a child. And in other cultures, it has to do with child abduction. So how do you think that plays into the novel?
The child abduction could kind of be when Hassan's son is taken as a rape slave. And his parents are murdered, so it kind of symbolizes the infertility of them has turned into worse, and it's become not just infertility on one side, but crime.
Okay, in the Jewish religion, in the story of Adam and Eve on the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it wasn't apples, it was pomegranates that were growing. And it didn't represent the knowledge of good and evil, it represented knowledge of sexuality and death. So it was forbidden, the knowledge of sexual things were forbidden. So how do you think that plays into Seth and his kind of pedophilic nature? What do you think? Well, I think that the pomegranate tree, when Hassan and Amir were friends, it was really vibrant, and it was growing, and it kind of grew with them. But then after the rape, after it was a sexual crime, it started to die. And so I think it represented that what Seth found like pleasing to himself was kind of forbidden, especially by their culture and their religion. So, yeah, that's all.
I think also, like, I think in ancient Greece, the pomegranate is like the food of the underworld, and Persephone like ate the pomegranate, and then she couldn't leave. She wasn't able to like leave the underworld. So I think that's kind of significant because in a way, like once Amir starts like doing things wrong, it's like he can't leave. So it's just like Persephone ate the pomegranate and can't leave. And same thing goes for Seth too, because like Seth is living that way of life, and like he can't find a way to leave from all his violence and cruelty and all.
Well, with the story of Persephone, it's that she cannot leave in the winter and fall, I believe. So then I think that kind of symbolizes how what Amir goes through when it's winter, because it's just like that time of when he remembers what he's done and he remembers his sin. And then like in spring and summer is a time where he can kind of forget about that, and then like it's just kind of a process of remembering and forgetting his entire life until he goes and tries to make amends.
When she's in the underworld, the fruit, all the plants are asleep, that's what they say. So they aren't growing or producing fruit, but when she returns, they start to grow again because pomegranate seed represents the fertility and abundance that she brings with her and life rejoicing.
So you could say that the pomegranate tree, as he returns, he's redeeming himself and he's making the tree fertile again. He's reviving that friendship. So how does redemption play into this novel?
It's kind of like a major goal of personally Amir. It kind of drives all his actions and his words and thoughts throughout the entire thing. Because he's not only, because in the beginning of the novel, before the rape, he's trying to make up for, he believes that he thinks that Baba thinks that he killed his wife, and he blames himself for it, and he thinks that the reason that they have such a bad connection, Baba and him, is because that's how Baba views him. So in the beginning of the novel, he's just trying to please Baba and make amends for that, even though it's really not his fault. And then after the rape, he has more than just trying to make amends with Baba. He's also trying to make up for letting Hassan get raped.
Page 19, Amir says, because the truth of it was, I always felt like Baba hated me a little, and why not? After all, I had killed his beloved wife, his beautiful princess, hadn't I? The least I could have done was to have had the decency to have turned out a little more like him, but I hadn't turned out like him, not at all.
Page 302. This is Rahim Khan's letter to Amir, and he says, I loved him because he was my friend, but also because he was a good man, maybe even a great man. So we're talking about Baba. And this is what I want you to understand, that good, real good, was born out of your father's remorse. Sometimes I think everything he did, feeding the poor on the streets, building the orphanage, giving money to friends in need, it was all his way of redeeming himself. And that, I believe, is what true redemption is, Amir John, when guilt leads to good. So how does Amir's guilt in the novel lead to his good?
He goes back to Afghanistan and he hears of what's happened to Hassan and his wife, and he takes on their orphan child, so that it's a way, kind of like how Baba took in Hassan and his father, and he's going to do that with Hassan.
That's another thing. Was it really good that Amir brought Sarab out of his home country? I mean, that was where he grew up. Even if it doesn't have like the best of memories, was that actually the best thing that he could have done for Sarab?
I kind of think it was, because he may not want to now be in America. He kind of wants to stay there, but there's nothing for him left in Afghanistan. I mean, the Taliban is going to be taking over, and there's going to be even more war and death than there already is. And he doesn't even have parents, or he'll be in an orphanage. So there's not much there for him. He doesn't have anywhere else to go.
One of the main things that I have is that Amir thinks in the book that he's the only one that sins and the only one that needs to be redeemed. But then in that letter that we just heard, when he receives from Rahim Khan, he realizes that his father also sinned, and his father also did the things in his life to feel redemption and everything that he did in his life was to make him feel good about himself for not being able to parent his son the way that he wished he could, because he wasn't allowed to say that that was also his son. So I think that gives Amir a lot of self-relief that he also wasn't the only one who sinned, and that there is a way to be good again because his father seemed to do it. So I think he has hope that he's going to be able to do it as well. And one of the big moments, I think, that parallel each other for redemption is at the beginning of the book, after the rape, Amir puts the money underneath Hassan's mattress and puts the watch and the gift, and then frames him for stealing it. And then later on in the book, on page 242, when he's back in Afghanistan and he's with Farid's brother and staying with them for the night before they go on, there's two young boys, and he says on page 242, "Earlier that morning, when I was certain no one was looking, I did something I hadn't done in 26 years. I planted a fistful of crumpled money under the mattress." So he turned something bad into something good. He gave money to those who are in need, and I think that made him feel like that part of his sin was redeemed because he changed it from something bad to something good.
One of the two main parts in the novel, right before the rape of Hassan when they're flying the kite, and then also in the very end when they're flying the kite. So how does that parallel, how does that mirror show that he was redeemed, or do you think that he was redeemed in the end?
I don't think he was redeemed yet. I think that his redemption will come when Sarab is happy to be in the country, and they're almost like that picture perfect family that a normal book would end with. But this kind of gives you just a hopeful feeling, and that's how Amir feels, because that smile gives him hope, and he knows he's not there yet, but that gives him at least the opportunity, and he knows that there is a chance that he can make it good.
What do the kites represent in the novel?
Well, their colors, whatever color they have, represent different things every time. I feel like the red kite on page 1, at the very beginning when he's in San Francisco, and it says, "Then I glanced up and saw a pair of kites spread with long blue sails soaring in the sky." I feel like the red represents the love that he has for the law and the love that he has for Hassan and the way that they love him back and the relationships that they have.
That same part says with long blue tails, so the blue could symbolize either sadness that he feels for the loss of his friend and for his father. But I feel like near the end it also can represent new hope on page, when he mentions it again in chapter 14.
Yeah. And then on chapter 1, also on page 1, he says, "They danced high above the trees on the west end of the park, over the windows, floating side by side like a pair of eyes looking down on San Francisco." And that could be like Hassan or Baba watching over him, even though they're both dead. Just they're looking on to him from Afghanistan, and they're guiding him.
Why are kites so important to Amir?
Because for Amir, it's, as you see on page 49, he says that it's the paper-thin slice that connects his spheres, like him and Baba's sphere, which I think is kind of interesting because when I think of a thin slice that connects two spheres, I think of the Eucharist in a way, because the Eucharist for our faith connects heaven and earth, and I think that's an interesting connection between this aspect.
And when you look at Afghanistan and America, we kind of fly kites just for leisure, but there they have actually a whole kite fighting tournament dedicated to the kite.
How is his relationship with Baba determined, well, how does he feel his relationship with Baba determined by how he does?
I feel like it's distant, and then once he is cutting all these kites and he has 4 more to go or whatever, and he feels this adrenaline rush, he feels like he's finally going to win Baba over if he wins this kite tournament, and he's finally going to be proud of him and be like the son he always wanted, and that's pretty much all he has to go off of. is this Kite Tournament because he can't do anything else that leads to a lot of conflict.
So the most violent act in this book involves the kite. So what does violence have to do with this novel? How does it play into the course of the novel?
Well, there's violence in like a lot of different levels throughout the novel because there's the global, the personal, the kite fighting, like, and it's such a normal thing in Afghanistan for all the violence. Like a bunch of especially adult males, I feel like in Afghanistan, they just resort to violence so quickly and they don't think that much of it as we would. Just for example, like when Baba gets mad about the people smuggling van not being there illegally, he almost strangles the guy. And just a few seconds later, he was being heroic. So I mean, that's just how quickly he will go to violence.
And so the Afghan men are just accustomed to being more aggressive and getting as they want. And so on page 198 and 199, it talks about how Rahim Khan is describing how even worse the Afghan man, being the Taliban, has made Afghanistan when he talks about how aggressive a soccer game is when a Taliban man starts hitting Rahim when he starts yelling too loudly at the soccer game. He says, "Do that again and I'll cut out your tongue, you old donkey," he said. And that also shows how lack of respect the country has become. And then Rahim also continues to talk on page 216 of how aggressive the country is, and saying, by giving the letter to Amir that Hassan wrote towards him about how he and his wife went out shopping one day and his wife talked a bit too loudly and she got abused for that talking too loudly and the lack of like saying that women are not to be as aggressive as the men should be, and so the Taliban found it as to be disrespect when she thought it was acceptable to be talking louder to a man even though he had a slight loss of hearing.
And then there's the part where Soraya ran off with that one boy, and her father went to find her and get her. Well, he brought a gun and was threatening to hurt and kill him, and all of that. That just shows how men are so prone to the violence. And even today, if a Afghan woman would run off with a man, a father wouldn't just bring a gun and threaten. He would end up either killing the girl, killing the boy, or completely destroying her looks or her whole body and hurting her. And that just shows how they're just so focused on violence because that's just what they're around all the time.
I feel like they don't think about it, they just do it because that's what they're used to.
Yeah, and that's again mentioned on page 212 when he says, "Our ears become accustomed to the whistle of falling shells, to the rumble of gunfire. Our eyes familiar with the sight of men digging bodies out of piles of rubble. Kabul in these days, Amir John, was as close as you could get to that proverbial hell on earth." So he's calling Afghanistan almost as a hell because of how violent it's become. And they're just used to it by now. They're becoming accustomed to the fact that they have to accept that it's going to be like this for a while and that things are just going to be aggressive and violent continually. And that's just what the country has become, and we have to accept it.
I think that one thing that violence does for the novel is it kind of levels the playing field, because at the beginning we see that Hassan has the cleft lip, and then when he has surgery done, he has the scar. And then at the end of the novel, Amir has the same scar. And I think at the beginning, Amir saw that as a reason that he was above. It was just something that he was better than Hassan in it because he wasn't better at much than Hassan. And then at the end, he has that same scar.
He has a scar on the side of me.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So so the main question of the novel is, the main point of the novel is Amir is trying to redeem himself. He's trying to make up for his past. So based on all of the literary devices that we've seen and all the things we talked about, do you think that he's in his end is redeemed? Do you think that he's made up for his sins?
I think it forced, sorry,
I think he's like working toward it, and I think that he has potential of being able to be redeemed in the end. But I don't think he's necessarily reached it yet, because the amount of sins that he's committed, I mean, it wasn't just that one thing. It's not he just witnessed Hassan's raising and telling him. I mean, that's one thing. But there was so many other just small things that led up to that and that followed that. I think that it's hard to do one act of goodness. That one act of goodness can't make up for those multiple deeds of.
Yeah, I think he was redeemed for some of the things he did. Say for planting the money. Well, he gave money back. There's a thing that he was partially redeemed for. But then again, Hassan was never like angry at Amir for just walking. I mean, he might have been hurt, but he never really showed it. He was always still loyal. So I think he didn't truly need redemption for that, like from Hassan, like forgiveness from Hassan or whatever. I think he just needed to feel redeemed for himself, not necessarily towards that person.
Right.